How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the Winners Club podcast. Now, in today's episode, we are going to be discussing ego. What is the ego? How to tame your ego, and also how to better one's ego. Now, again, if you are new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications, as that is the best way to stay up to date on the Winners Club content. You can also find the audio version of this podcast. The link will be down below as well. Make sure to check that out. And again, we hope you all have a lovely day and a great week. We appreciate all the love and support. Now, let's get into today's episode.
3, 2, 1. Alright, so we're going to be talking about the ego today. You know, it's a pretty interesting topic in psychology. Everybody's got an ego, whether you have a big ego, a minimal ego. Your ego is there in everybody. So first we're going to be talking about mapping the ego, what the ego even is, because sometimes there's a misconception, you know. So I didn't even know what the ego was until I had to actually learn about it. And we're going to be talking how to work with the ego, how to tame it. A lot of people have some wild egos, so I'll talk a little bit about how you can, relax with it. And then lastly, how to remove it or kind of digress it a bit, if you have an aggressive ego or an inflated ego. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Brett and Miles, I want you guys to, tell me real quick, what is the id, the ego, and the superego, the makeup of, the ego itself?
Well, so we have, like you just said, we have three parts of our ego: the id, the superego, and the ego. So your id is picture it like a devil and an angel on your shoulder, right? Your id is your impulses and your urges and stuff and your needs. That's like the devil. So like whenever you feel you need the impulse to do something, whether it's buying something, whether it's doing something, that's your id. Your superego is the complete opposite. That's feelings of pride and satisfaction. So basically telling you to do good things. And you develop that around the ages from like 3 to 5. And then your ego is it's like yourself. So your id and your superego come together to become your ego. So so you're born with an id, and depending on how, the components of your childhood, that's what makes your ego, what develops your id, your superego, and your ego. But Brad, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
No, yeah, going off of what you said, Sigmund Freud was the first one to sort of bring up these three aspects of the ego, or the id, the ego, and the superego. And another thing is he had the iceberg model, which if you picture an iceberg, picture it emerging above the ocean. The conscious mind, now your ego is on the left of that. It's just emerging, not submerging above the water, but it's just above it. And the superego is on the right, also with involving in the conscious mind. But your id, however, it's below the sea. It's in your unconscious now. And like Miles said, it's your darkest desires, your impulses, and your, unwanted needs. And also, going off of that, Freud called this the pleasure principle, which if it feels good, so be it, and do it. That's pretty much what the id consists of and what your mind is pretty much telling you, because it's all subconscious.
For sure. I like the Freud examples, he's the godfather of psychology. He was the founder of this notion. And I want to refer real quick to the ego in a more broad term. So the ego, like Miles said, parts of their components at least, were developed at a young age, 3 to 5. So when we examine children, they're very egocentric, right? You'd say that they're very self-centered. They only think of I. That's just how children even talk. Reference to a child wanting to go to the park. I go park. That's how a child's going to say it. A 3-year-old's going to say, I go park. I mean, they're not saying, oh, can we go to the park? They're not asking questions. They're saying, I go park, because they're very self-centered and egocentric at that point. So your ego is, in fact, developed at a young age. When we see it progress over time, we see components of the id and the superego influence our behavior and even our dictations of what's right and wrong. So if you have a bad kid growing up who's, always engaging in delinquent behavior and things like that, his id is totally trumping his ego and his superego, where now his devil is taking over in his mind. You know what I mean? And those are the people, though, who can grow up with inflated egos, egos that are fragile even. Some people act a specific way to protect their ego. they feel that's the way they have to be. That's more in the form of living with a stronger id than anything else, you know? What do you guys think about that though? Like what even like can you do to be aware of the id if it's leading you down a wrong path?
Yeah, I think a big misconception too is many people think they can have just one type of that ego where they're just they're just only the ego, or they're only the super ego, rather than you have the id, ego, and the super ego.
Have all three. You essentially have all three, and there is no way around it because it's the components that make up ego personality. Everybody has like an ego, whether you like to say it or not. It's either on a much larger scale or a minimal scale. But I want to just cut in real quick, Brett, because it was kind of a rhetorical question. I was going to answer it, so that was my fault. I'll tell you right now what some unhealthy or large ego symptoms are, and then we'll just talk about that. So we have selfishness, pleasurability, rebellious, master manipulator, critical and enabling. I definitely want to highlight master manipulator because that is just the perfect term for somebody who has an inflated ego. I feel like though people who act like that, possess those characteristics, do that to hide some sort of internalized feeling. They use the ego as an excuse, kind of like a shield, to protect who they even are in their own self-identity. And when we examine it, people who have an ego are typically sensitive people, What do you think about that?
I think that sort of acknowledging your ego is a good step forward to improving your ego. I think a lot of people will just, obviously we always say, fall into the least path of resistance. They'll do the easiest possible thing they can do, whether that's, I'm going to eat this fast food just because it's, it'll produce that pleasure hormone or that pleasure principle that we've been talking about that falls into the id. Or I'll have drinks with friends, stuff like that. I think having too much of id and overpowering it sort of ruins it. It totally diminishes the whole other part of the ego, and more so they're living now where they're only engaged sort of in the id rather than jumping between parts and living in the reality and controlling your ego and all that other parts, which is what the ego is primarily for, is controlling your reality. You are in control.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, basically what I was saying, what I just tried to do was explain the examples of what it looks like when you prioritize your id over the other two parts of your ego.
Okay.
Your super ego and your regular ego. So when you live kind of with the id as the primary focus, you typically are more selfish. You seek your own individual pleasure. You're rebellious. You're associated as being a master manipulator, and you are critical and enabling. Would you say that's kind of how it is, though, in the sense of, you guys referred to the id being like the devil. Those are not good qualities, Do you have anything to add or anything to talk about that?
Well, are you asking me how you recognize it? How can you go about it differently? Or is
definitely
it
that too? Because Brett was saying, just getting the awareness of, this is just a part of me. This is not entirely me. I think we should talk about like an aspect of detachment from the present moment, because when the ego's inflicted by something, or conflicted for that matter, people definitely tend to shell up in a ball and think that they're being attacked, and then it sparks a defense mechanism, which is essentially the id, and that's how these behaviors are transmitted. So what do you think about that?
I think the id is very popular in today's world, and I know we always refer back to the example of social media, but I think that plays a huge part in it, because you see people doing all these impulsive things or things that are chaotic. I'm going to use Monday at UConn as a perfect example of this. You saw how everybody was breaking stuff and getting chaotic after the game, right?
You were there.
I was there. I wasn't breaking stuff though. I was not breaking stuff at all. But people were breaking stuff and doing impulsive things because they are influenced by other people that are doing it. So I think that was an id. People were acting towards their ids, their impulses, like, oh, I see people breaking stuff. Now I want to do that. You know what I mean? So I think the id is really influenced by your social components. I mean, it is internal. I do believe that, but I think it's more external because of the way, especially in today's world, because you got social media and you got other things such as that. Now, ways to kind of recognize it, I think just really taking a step back and looking at your actions, studying yourself, asking yourself why. That's something I have written down in my notes. Why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that was the right choice in terms of acting towards your id? Like, for example, like I said, the chaotic stuff on Monday. Why do you think that was a good idea to go break that window? Why do you think it was a good idea to rip down that light pole? You know, that's one way to recognize it and improve on it, because you could really take a step back and be like, oh shit, like that wasn't a good idea. I shouldn't have did that, and do better next time. So I think that's really my hot take on it, to be honest.
That's tough. And the ego is like driven by emotions. So like for your example, Miles, like when you were saying like when you're doing something stupid and then you fall back and then ask yourself why, you internalize the question why. Well, you should also, look at the emotion that's tied with that behavior. So I'm just gonna list some emotions, and Miles, you pick one that, is emphasized to you, that those kids on campus that were doing that kind of shit, like maybe what was this emotion doing to influence that behavior? So I'm going to just read the 8 ego-driven emotions. So first is desire. Second is fear. The third is anger. The fourth is resentment. The fifth is agitation/anxiety.
Okay.
The sixth is lethargy. Seventh is doubt. And eighth is pride. For me, the one that strikes out to me the most is fear, because when you're in a social setting, you fear not following the status quo, the typical social behavior. So when everybody's having a riot and you're out there in that environment, you feel like you have to, follow suit in order to belong, even in that environment, in that group setting. And I think that's where a lot of people conform and mash their egos, or essentially mix their id and their superego, their logic for both, because you guys said your superego is more about morality, your ethics, your more positive minded self. Those get conflicted when you have to conform to something, So I think you could definitely even ask that question to a much, much deeper meaning, because why am I here right now? You know what I mean? It's not just a why. It's why did I do that? Why am I here? Why am I even thinking that this is okay in this moment when I never would have had I not been there?
Okay, so I'm going to talk real quick about how to sort of tame your ego. And I think just to bring up sort of the points you guys were bringing up earlier too, is when the ego fails, in its attempt, it sort of goes back to that reality principle, which that can cause a ton of anxiety. Like you were saying, defense mechanisms are employed, rational, because all the ego uses secondary process thinking, which is rational, realistic, and sort of oriented towards problem solving. And so what I think, sort of when trying to contain and better your ego, I think it's more so internal. I think you should maybe practice meditation, sit with yourself and your thoughts, and just think about what am I thinking about throughout the day. And also, whenever you feel that anger or resentment, learning to control your emotions is, I think, a huge factor in today's society that a lot of people don't really do nowadays. I don't think a lot of people are very controlled with their emotions. I think they really express it more than control. Maybe I shouldn't throw this rock at a window during a riot, or maybe I shouldn't throw a lamppost through a window. I think having control of your emotion and sort of practicing mindfulness and you're just getting to know yourself, becoming aware, and having a sense of clarity, I think is the most important thing for somebody if they are willing to sort of better their ego, get used to their ego, and also understand it, their ego as well, and their self.
You're right. I like how you referred to mindfulness because I mean I'm a huge advocate for journaling and
Hmm.
practicing mindfulness because you know it's a way of having your own self conversation, or even just sitting alone with your thoughts. For me, I like to journal just to get shit out of my head,
Hmm.
kind of get a better understanding of my emotions, my feelings, and I feel like it makes me a healthier communicator. For practicing mindfulness, though, it's almost like my way of detaching from my behavior thought. It's like it's the total opposite. I'm journaling to engage, and then I'm meditating to get out of it.
Hmm.
Because then I know that it's just temporary and this too shall pass. Um,
Mm.
and I did, for a long time, have a very fragile ego. I was easily offended, and I'll just pull up some examples really quick. Um, I'm just going to ask the question, how do I even know if I have an ego? Well, I'll answer it. I always felt like I needed to be right. That was like a huge thing. I always felt like I had to win arguments. I ignored other people's feedback,
Mm.
valuable feedback from people in my close circle. I hated losing because I was obsessed with my self image. That's a huge one. Being obsessed with your self image, it's almost like when you're contradicted in a new way where somebody insults you, you get very defensive, like we talk about,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
you're so obsessed with your self image. It's like when somebody doesn't see it the way you do, you go ape shit. But that's totally okay. You know what I mean? It's just if you do that and you have intense um, defense mechanism responses, then odds are you do have an ego, a pretty high
Mm.
one for that matter. And lastly, I always believed that I must always have more. I was never really satisfied with the things that I had and was always aiming for something higher. But, like we talk about purpose, purpose definitely falls under that line because um, there's multiple purposes in life. It's not just one purpose.
Mm.
So I think that's definitely a way to work with it is really focus on um, purposes over passion. I feel like if you have a new path, unraveling in front of you that you're still a little uncertain about, but you know it's the right path for you, regardless of what your ego is trying to tell you, that little annoying voice in the back of your head that's saying, oh no, I want to do this, I want to do that, I don't want to change. It's your id. It's your little devil on your shoulder talking to you because it doesn't want change to occur. So really what it is psychologically reducing the impact your id has on your reality, your
Mm.
consciousness. Miles, you really did talk a lot about the id when we first started this episode. Would you say um, a way to tame the ego is by reducing the impact of the id?
100%. And that's because, once again, your id is your impulses. It's like the devil on your shoulder, right? So, you know how, like, some people, they have an ego that's so big to the point where they think they're better than everybody? Like, the id plays a big role in that, obviously, because, once again,
Hmm.
that is your. Um, it's the id is. I don't think I mentioned this before, but the id is in your subconscious. It's something that you're not really aware of, but it's there. It shows in your ego over time. So when somebody has a really big ego to the point where they're like, I'm better than this person, that's your id. You may not realize that, which is why I think it's so essential that you kind of step back and kind of look at the why in a sense.
Mm.
But I think if you, but, shit, what was I saying? Uh, if you really take a step back and ask yourself why once again and kind of lower your id by improving the way you do certain things, so like your habits, the way you talk to people, the way you go about doing certain things, that'll tame the ego a bit because you're developing new habits. I feel as though
Changing the attitude as well is a huge part because if
that
you
too.
have if you have the attitude of I'm gonna wake up and I'm just better than you,
Right,
like
exactly. That's automatically going to spike your id.
exactly. I think for me when I can refer back to when I had a very large ego and a fragile ego for that matter. I did wake up on a daily basis thinking that I had some sort of advantage in my life over others when that's just totally not the case. If something for me is that I had to finally get humbled by shit to then ask myself, why do I feel like I hold so much valuable power over others when I don't? Do I wear Saint Laurent all the time? No. Do I have a big gold chain? No. Do I drive a really fancy car? No. There's nothing financially that puts me above other people. Now, when I ask myself, am I so much of a better person? Are my morals so much better than other people that makes me a better person? No. So all you have to do is kind of just take a step back, analyze yourself outside of your own self. It sounds very weird at first, but it's like you close your eyes, you just picture how you look from other people's perspectives. You kind of become aware of, like I said earlier, you know what I mean? Like how I feel like I was ignoring other people's feedback. You then become aware of it, and the ego is part of. It's interesting because it's part of the pre-conscious, the conscious, and the unconscious. It renders through all of them. You know what I mean? You're not thinking about it sometimes. Sometimes you kind of are, and sometimes you're totally present in the moment. So it's a good idea to kind of, think about what other people are telling you and think of it from their perspective. And that really, really helped me at least reduce the impact of my ego.
I want to go off of what Miles was saying about how controlling sort of the id and also the super ego too. You can use the super ego to control more of the id. It's because it's sort of its job is to control the id's impulses and also turn to more realistic goals rather than like doing the realistic goals, which is in your ego. And I think sort of having a balance of the ego and the super ego is really good for sort of your mental health, and also having that awareness and that feedback, because also the super ego too, it's self-critiquing you always, and it strives for perfection.
Definitely. It's definitely striving for perfection. That's like what I said is how, you always want more when you have a large ego. It's like you're not satisfied with things that should bring you satisfaction in a sense. It's always like you're striving for more. Very stupid example, but look at the character arc of the infamous Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader. In my opinion, it's one of the best fictional character developments we've seen in film, because when Anakin starts off, he has no ego. The part of the Jedi is, in a sense, the super ego. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Star Wars is very cool because it does talk, even in movies, fictional movies as a whole, highlight that part of psychology. So they contrast the good and the bad. So you have the Jedis, and then you have the Sith Lords. So Anakin is born to be the chosen one, the super ego, the moral and ethical specimen. But then we see the id corrupt his mind, and his greed takes over a part of, the ego. His ego obviously inflates because he wants supremacy over everybody. He falls, and it, totally corrupts his life. And that's what happens when somebody, I know this is a crazy example, but that's what happens, though, when we become so consciously swayed by our id rather than the super ego and the regular ego, because they're supposed to work as a team. You know what I mean? It's almost like a fight, flight, and present response. That's how I look at it, at least. You fight because you feel the need to defend yourself and bring out and unleash your aggression, your desires, your instincts that we talk about in the id. And the super ego is like your morals. Like, is this right of me to do this? Maybe I should just walk away. And your ego is you in the present moment. You dictate which path between the two you're going to follow. I mean, it can go in so many different ways. I love talking about it because I think the ego, everybody can relate to it. So when we observe other people's behaviors, as a psychology major, now it's like second nature to me. Like, I can just see how people behave and understand it, and understand who has an ego, who doesn't. But it's very interesting in the people, though, who are very driven into the superego, because they had a unique ability to identify this and live and choose the good. So credits to them, because that's very hard to do. I think, part of that, though, is like their way of exploring a wider array of social ability. I feel like people who live with more conscious engagement in superego are definitely people who are more sociable, more likable, more presentable. I mean, let's shout him out. I mean, Devon Thompson, who came on this podcast, like, he is somebody I really, really credit because I have witnessed firsthand, all three of us have, because we're friends with him. His superego is amazing, and he's such a pleasure to be around. And it's because he increased his wide array of social ability. He increased all these other things that made him more present in the moment in a positive way. That's what we should, preach. He's a role model to me, and then he's got his own role models. But as a Columbia student who, totally transformed his life, like, that's very, very impressive.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw some examples out to the audience too, as well as just how to sort of, if you're thinking about changing, maybe you're listening now and thinking, oh my God, I have too much id, or maybe you're just too much sort of ego, sort of some ways to practicing that awareness. I know we've thrown some examples out, like meditation, journaling, just spending some alone time with yourself, getting used to your thoughts. And I think practicing wisdom, focus, and just be patient with your thoughts. Also look at how you're living your life, what habits are working for you, what systems are working for you, what's not, and sort of changing that. Maybe that's causing some resentment. Also, who you're hanging out with, whether that's making you a better person or a worse person, and just always practicing that wisdom, that discipline, and also showing love to other people. Love what you do, love what they do, and being very optimistic.
For sure, and that's going to lead to a lot of good things. Like, it's going to increase a healthier self-concept. One is that, could be resilient, and you can interpret situations and, go beyond them. You know what I mean? You're not driven by impulse or instincts. You can think in the moment, process information, and then make a more logical and rational decision or engage in some sort of behavior. I mean, if you go and put in the work for it. So
now, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, if you are new here, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and also turn on the bell notification. So that is the best way to stay up to date with the Winners Club content. You can also click right here. We just did a video talking about the positive effects and the negative effects of parenting. You can also find more content from us. Our socials will be down below in the description. Now, we hope you all have a lovely day and a great week. And until next time.